Kevin Spacey was acquitted of sexual assault charges in London last week, and the star is already talking about what's next for his career. But what really lies ahead for actors like him after their reputations have taken a hit? Can they come back? I'm Emil Niazi sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, let's get right into this. This is actor Kevin Spacey talking to reporters outside a London courthouse last week.
But I would like to say that I'm enormously grateful to the jury for having taken the time to examine all of the evidence and all of the facts carefully before they reach their decision. And I am humbled by the outcome today.
Kevin Spacey was acquitted of the 9 charges against him involving 4 men. The Oscar winner has been out of the limelight since he was first accused of sexual misconduct back in 2017. Since then, more than 30 people have come forward to accuse Spacey of inappropriate sexual behavior dating all the way back to the 1980s. Last week's verdict will be the second time he's been legally cleared of wrongdoing. It follows a 2022 civil case that also ruled in his favor. And now he's talking about getting back to work. So what could that look like exactly? Do these court rulings hold any sway in the court of public opinion? And what has the film industry learned or not learned from the Kevin Spacey saga? To help answer these questions, I'm joined now by Vulture critic Jason P. Frank and Kate Wilson, a film producer based in London, who's also recently launched an app, Call It, that is very relevant to this discussion. Jason, I want to start with you because it's been 6 years since these allegations came out. And, I remember the pushback, the reaction professionally was very swift. He lost his starring role on House of Cards and other big movies. But now he's been cleared in 2 separate trials. What impact, if any, are these going to have on his reputation in Hollywood?
I mean, I do think, unfortunately, it is a wait-and-see situation. He's been out of the limelight for a really long time now. 6 years is a really long time to be away from Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if there are directors, if they're casting people, if there are producers who are excited to work with him anymore. They haven't worked with him in a while. I think there's a grossness around Kevin Spacey right now that maybe hasn't even affected some of his peers who have been accused of sexual assaults. What you want to attribute that to is up to you. But I don't think his reputation is necessarily unsullied, even though he has been acquitted of all of his crimes. Mm-hmm.
And I want to come back to this idea you've raised about, what might be impacting that idea of grossness around him. But Kate, first, you're in London where he was just acquitted. What were your thoughts on this trial?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this was a criminal trial. And so that jury found that they could not find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Mm-hmm. That's very different from whether or not they think, as a civil trial would, on the balance of probability, that he was guilty of these behaviors. And what we have to do as an industry and as a society is figure out what our burden of proof is. Do we need people to be held to the criminal standard in order for them to not get jobs and not have the type of opportunities Kevin Spacey's had? I think as an industry, we need to set a standard that sets a really high expectation of these people that have absolutely huge influence over the entirety of society. So until we set that standard, it's going to be very hard for us to enforce consequences when people fall beneath that standard. But in my opinion, it should be a very high standard. The fact that he's been found criminally non-liable for these behaviors is neither here nor there. We shouldn't let it distract us.
Right. I mean, it's complicated and blurry because some people would say, well, if I'm found innocent, then I should be allowed back to work. But I think you've raised a really interesting point. Last month before the trial, Kevin Spacey gave an interview to a German magazine where he said, "In 10 years, this trial won't mean anything. My work will live longer than I will, and that's what will be remembered. There are people right now who are ready to hire me the moment I am cleared of these charges in London." Jason, he seems pretty emphatic that he will work again, but who do you think he's talking about there? Who are these people that are, lining up to work with Kevin Spacey?
Well, he's already been working in Europe throughout these trials. So if I were to predict, I would imagine that they are based in Europe. Mm-hmm. I don't think that there are American directors who are particularly excited about working with him. I think he still has the stench of this. I also think it's worth noting that terribly and horribly, he came out as a way of defending himself against these sexual assault allegations when they first came out, when Anthony Rapp first came forward, which is a terrible, horrible thing to do and associates queerness with sexual assault. And that it makes my skin crawl. But I also think it's worth noting that he's come out now. Mm-hmm. And I think there aren't actors really of Kevin Spacey's stature who are gay in America, who are American. That doesn't really happen. So do I think that is also affecting this? I have to imagine it would be. There's a grossness around him with sexual assault, and then a continued grossness around him sexually with his well, I don't want to call it queerness, but his homosexuality, mm-hmm. That I think is also there, that will be affecting American directors as well. And I think that those combined perceptions of him is going to make it very, very difficult for him to work in Hollywood. And I think that's a good thing. And
you did bring this up. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to make the observation. I totally agree with everything you're saying, Jason. I was going to make the observation that in the audio that you played at the beginning of the segment, he said, "This is so humbling for me." And then the quote that you just read from the German newspaper is probably the least humble thing I've ever heard mm-hmm. in my life. My work will outlive me and anyone that I've sexually assaulted is basically kind of what he's saying. But I think in terms of where he worked, he has already made a film in the UK. He has been working during this process. Let's not forget that he was actually working in All the Money in the World when this all hit. He was then removed from All the Money in the World before that was released. And I think it's worth noting that, a Johnny Depp film opened the Cannes Film Festival this year. Venice is coming up. We have films from Luc Besson. We have a film from Roman Polanski. Mm-hmm. So it is really worth noting that these allegations, particularly when they're not proven. Of course, Polanski did enter into a plea agreement and is guilty of the crime of sexual intercourse with a minor. However, Luc Besson was not found guilty. Johnny Depp was not found guilty in a criminal sense. European filmmakers and producers and financiers are still employing these directors. So there will be opportunities for him to work. Absolutely. It is whether or not those kind of Hollywood blockbusters would take the risk with him. And what I would say to that is when we talk about the standard and the idea of innocence being proven guilty, from a civil standard, we mustn't create negligent places of work where people are at risk. And if there's any foreseeable risk of harm to people working on a production with Kevin Spacey, we must take steps to make sure that people are safe.
Well, I want to just talk about the European film industry for a second, because as you mentioned, people like Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Johnny Depp are, they may be out of the North American spotlight, but they are finding steady work across the pond, so to speak. Jason, what's happening in Europe that they're okay with this?
Well, I'm going to throw it actually to Kate, if I may, because I was talking to her a little bit beforehand, and she's currently in Europe, and I'd love to hear her perspective, and then I can chime in, if I may.
Yes, please. Kate, what's different about the industry there than in North America?
I think we can go from the micro individual experience to the macro here. Insofar as on a micro level, there is more of a culture of the auteur within Europe. And so the individual that has the huge talent that can kind of do no wrong is much more, particularly within the field of cinema, absolutely highly regarded. And there is less of a problem separating the art from the artist within European culture than there is in the US, which has much more of an evolving culture. It moves much more quickly in terms of what we would call kind of woke culture. The movement in terms of what's acceptable changes very, very quickly. And I think from a macro perspective, a lot of that has to do with the youth of the United States, of North America, and the fact that you are a young country, that there isn't this kind of inherited wealth of history that kind of propels these decisions and propels culture forwards, where many of the people within the historic context, say, particularly of France, are not great people, but they're revered people nonetheless. And there's no problem within European culture continuing to revere someone who's behaved badly, behaved poorly In fact, it's often yeah. Sorry, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'd add here is that Hollywood as a system is extremely capitalist. It's extremely money focused. And so the minute that the perception becomes something that could be that could make the film a liability, it becomes much more likely that they will kick someone out. Like Harvey Weinstein was an open secret in Hollywood for years and years and years, and they didn't care. But the minute the allegations came out and there was and his presence was going to be a liability to these films financially, that's when they got rid of him. And so I would say that Hollywood, because it's so capitalist, sees these people as potential liabilities. Ezra Miller's The Flash came out earlier this year, and they have obviously been accused of terrible things, including sexual assault. But the potentiality for money was still so large that they released the film anyway. But I don't think Ezra Miller will be featured in more Hollywood films going forward. It was just that The Flash had already filmed. Yeah. Right. So anything that that is going to potentially make more money, even if it means releasing something that has a sexual abuser's name on it, they will do. But I also think that because they don't have this separating the art from the artist, like art matters type perspective necessarily as much as Europe does, they only care about the perception of popular culture.
So, Jason, do you think... Oh, sorry, Kate, did you want to...
I'm just saying it's really interesting, and I would totally agree. In Hollywood, film is a purely commercial medium. In the UK, we have a subsidized film sector, so it kind of sits in the middle ground. Versus France, for example, is a very heavily subsidized cultural medium. And so when you see these auteurs that are behaving badly, it's kind of the romanticization of that artist that sits outside of the norm. You want them to be the exception to the rule. You want them to behave in a way that's not okay with the social mores of the day, because that's how they'll make great art. You know, you've got Picasso is the example, the huge example of the greatest artist who behaved terribly towards everybody who was in his purview. And that's part of what puts him in that pantheon of the greatest artists, is his bad behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of that show, you know, it's Pablo-matic that's been up in Brooklyn, but also the pushback around that. You know, people weren't necessarily embracing it in the same way. And so I, start to think of this idea of cancel culture, and whether it really exists, but, we would need more time to get into that conversation. Kate, you developed an app that gets at some of the issues that we've been talking about today. And I understand it comes from your own experience working in the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about what that app is and sort of what led you to this moment?
Sure. It's called Call It, and it is an anonymous recording tool whereby everybody working in any business, actually, but particularly it's designed for film and TV projects, downloads an app. Their phone is associated but anonymously with a particular project via QR code, and each working day they're asked to record how they were treated at work that day, whether or not they had any concerns regarding health and safety, working conditions, or safeguarding, and if they experienced or witnessed bullying or harassment at work that day. And this just gives quantitative data to the producers, but it empowers those producers to take preventative measures and to consider that information an early warning system. So if you saw a lot of people were feeling as if they were being mistreated, or people recording incidents of, say, sexual harassment or of racism, then you're able to proactively engage with everybody working, remind them of what standard is expected of them. Again, we're back to this. I really believe we have to set a standard before we can accuse people of falling beneath that standard. And I think it should be a high one in an industry that has, I think, the more influence than any other medium in the world. And so we're now using the app. We have a brilliant partnership with ITV Studios. We are trying to engage with every single production in the UK, and we'll then be hopefully in Canada, hopefully in the US, hopefully all over the world. And it's a not-for-profit just run by 3 freelancers, 2 producers and a director.
That sounds great. Jason, do you think something like that would be helpful in terms of having, a standard for films and for people working on set in Hollywood?
Absolutely. And I think that the really key factor here is the anonymity, because I think a lot of people are scared of stepping forward because their careers will suffer. There's long been a mode of operating in Hollywood that asks people to not not care or to push their feelings aside so that their careers can advance. And that's your reward for doing that, basically. And I think the anonymity can be helpful in quelling those notions.
Well, thank you both so much for having this conversation. We've just been chatting about what's next for actor Kevin Spacey now that he has been acquitted of the 9 charges against him. Kate Wilson is a film producer based in London and creator of the app Call It. And Jason P. Frank is a culture writer for Vulture in New York. Thank you both for chatting today.
Thank you.
When I call on the telephone, and I don't know what you mean to me, but I want to turn you on, turn you up, figure you out. I want to take you on these words.
I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. That's a bit of REM with Strange Currencies. That's just one of the many nostalgic songs that have been remixed for the new season of The Bear. That's right, The Bear is here, and it is glorious. If you aren't familiar, the show is about a chef named Carmy. He's burned out from working at grueling Michelin-starred kitchens around the world. When his older brother dies, he comes back to his hometown of Chicago and takes over the family's collapsing sandwich shop. The first season was a huge hit because of how real the portrayal of restaurant life was. Real chefs and servers loved how honest it felt. People were dropping F-bombs, screaming behind in hot, tight corners, and putting out all kinds of fires, real and metaphorical. I talked to Grace Onasanya about season 2. She is a line cook at Quetzal in Toronto. I asked Grace if the second season has the same frenetic, panic-inducing energy of the first.
I wouldn't say it's the same fast, stressful pace as season 1. It's still stressful, but in a different way. You have more development of Carmen and the characters and the restaurant. It's more like the kind of anxiety and fear that comes with change, growing pains more. Certainly not the heart palpitation-inducing stress of season 1.
The first season ended with Carmy deciding to close the original beef to start a new restaurant. So there's a scene in the first episode where Carmy and Sydney are trying to get money for this venture. And in front of their investor, they have a big fight over Michelin stars.
This is going to be a destination spot. This is going to be an excellent restaurant. And I know that because we're going to get a star.
Sid.
Carm.
Stars.
Okay, well, you can say that because you already got one.
No, I never got one. I retained it.
That's basically a cousin of getting
not
one.
Not getting one. It was retaining one. Somebody else got it. I retained it.
Oh,
Guys,
yeah,
but
you kind of got one, though. What do you mean?
being
We could get one. Let's get a star.
Okay, I'm not in the restaurant world, but I know that Michelin stars are very controversial. In Canada, Toronto just got, their first sort of Michelin stars for restaurants.
Yes.
You are a line cook at Quetzal, which received a Michelin star last September.
That
How
I
did
am.
that scene sit with you?
I would say I'm definitely more on the Carmen side of the conversation.
F stars.
Not necessarily F stars, but I'm very distinct about the star itself. I am not a Michelin star chef. I happen to work at a restaurant that has a Michelin star. Carmen doesn't consider himself a Michelin star chef. Somebody else got the star. He retained it. He doesn't consider it his star. I don't consider Quetzal star my star. And it's not. But being Carmen who he is, he had to have all the stress, and all the anxiety, and all the pressure of maintaining that star. And it's very, very stressful. And you have all the detriments without actually having your name attached to it. So I can definitely see how Carmen wouldn't want to put that kind of pressure on his new restaurant, The Bear, which is essentially his dream restaurant, his baby. And then on the flip side, you have Sydney, who wants a Michelin star desperately because it is if not one of the top accolades you can receive in our industry. And we all remember Sydney from season 1. She, wants, bigger, better, more, and she's got a plan on how to do it and how to get there. So I can definitely understand why she wants to star, but Carmen is more, been there, done that. And I don't think you realize what you're getting into when you tell yourself you want this star. I think Carmen is happy for the bear to be the bear without all the stress that comes with stars.
Mm-hmm. It seems stressful. I mean, they've made entire movies about the process of getting a star, so I imagine it's very stressful. One of the sort of few criticisms of last season was that we didn't get to hear and see that much from some of the supporting characters like Chefs Tina and Ibra and Marcus. How are they fleshed out this season? Are they fleshed out this season?
They are. I definitely feel like the showrunners and the writers heard that criticism and said, okay, well, you want more character development for these characters? Here, we're going to give you more development for these characters. And specifically, Tina and Marcus, they get basically their own dedicated episodes to flesh out their characters. I know a lot of people were a little bit bristly with Tina last season because she was sort of an antagonist.
I'm telling you, beware of bitches with little notebooks. Sydney walked in here a couple days ago and now she's running shit just like that. Or willowy and scribbling. Chef, I would do anything to work at Noma. Bitch, look around. This ain't Noma.
We really see her open up and warm up and blossom as she moves into the sous chef position of the bear. Now, I definitely do feel like they could do more with the tertiary characters, such as Sweeps. And you're wondering if you're wondering who Sweeps is and you've seen both seasons, that's my point exactly. You could definitely learn more about the smaller characters on the show, but what they managed to fit in regards to character development in just 10 episodes, as well as, the central story of the restaurant and Carmen and everything else, I think is really, really great. And I expect that they'll do even more in season 3.
I always like Tina. I like her salty attitude and the way she says Jeff.
It's a little less salty in season 2, but she still says Jeff.
So every show, is sort of worried about that sophomore slump. Is season 2 going to be as good as season 1? Can it hold up? Can it maintain that sort of like glowing review? What do you think The Bear does to keep this story alive? Because people are loving season 2.
I don't think there's a sophomore slump. I actually said earlier that you could watch season 1 and 2 together. And if you weren't watching the episode numbers, you wouldn't know where the line break was. I don't think there's a slump at all. I think the story is just developing as it goes and getting richer and more in depth as every episode goes on. And I definitely see why people are raving about it. Me personally, I've watched the entire season at least twice already, if not individual episodes more times than that. They were very, very particular about taking whatever criticisms they received in season 1 and applying them and doing better in season 2. And I definitely appreciate that. I look forward to season 3 of The Bear. And I'm just really sad that I'm going to have to wait a whole year, if not more, to get more.
Grace, I love that you've already seen it twice. That is dedication. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Again, thank you for having me. I love coming in to talk about it. It is my passion as well.
Grace Onasanya is a line cook at Quetzal in Toronto. Season 2 of The Bear is out in Canada on Disney+. And that's it for the show today. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you so much for listening to Commotion.